Hey guys, tonight we tumble gently, if a bit unevenly, into the scorching, limestone-swept world of ancient Egypt. The sky above the Giza Plateau is a dusty gold, the sun's heat hanging low and heavy over the land. And everywhere you look, men in linen skirts are yelling about angles. You're standing among pyramid designers, yes, actual designers arguing over how steep a ramp should be. You'd think that raising a mountain of stone would require order, geometry, and teamwork. But nope. You're watching a dust-covered disaster unfold, one heated opinion at a time. This is not the Egypt of solemn sphinxes and serene pharaohs. This is Egypt on a construction deadline. And you're caught in the middle of a workplace drama where nobody agrees on anything, especially not the angle of the ramp that's supposed to carry 2-ton blocks up the face of a pyramid. You're about to witness professional bickering on a monumental scale. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is over there. I love seeing this sleepy little history crew stretch across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin by stepping into a world that smells faintly of stone dust, sweat, and roasted grain. The Giza worksite is a controlled chaos of swinging baskets, shouted orders, and distant hammering echoing through the plateau like a lazy drumbeat. Above it all, the half-finished pyramid rises like a question nobody agrees on how to answer. Standing at its base is a supervisor named Ephraim Short, loud, and in possession of the world's most questionable papyrus sketches. He's drawn a ramp so long it practically stretches to Thebes, a 10-degree incline. He shouts proudly, gentle enough for oxen, stable for sleds, and completely brilliant. Except 10 feet away, there's another crew leader, Hezira, leaning against a chipped block with arms crossed and skepticism thicker than his accent. Your ramp would take a decade to build, and that's before anyone even moves a single stone. Try 20 degrees, steeper, faster, smarter. Cue the yelling. Historians still argue whether pyramid ramps were straight, zigzagging, spiraling, or some chaotic combination of all three. And honestly, after a few minutes here, you understand why. Every foreman, scribe, and block hauler has their own personal gospel of slope design, and not a single one of them can do math without yelling about it first. One particularly hooded cluster has drawn a circle in the sand with twigs and pebbles, reenacting the great ramp debate in miniature. You kneel to watch as they move tiny stone chips up imaginary inclines. It's like ancient Egyptian Dungeons and Dragons, but with more sweating and less wizardry. Too shallow, and you'll run out of desert. One says, too steep, and you'll crush your workers. Another counters. Someone suggests teleportation. He's not invited back. Meanwhile, in the background, the labor force, tens of thousands of mostly conscripted workers just want to know how they're supposed to drag these granite blocks without throwing out their backs. The pyramid doesn't care. It rises day by day, indifferent to everyone's opinion. But still they argue. Mainstream archaeology tells us that ramps were essential to pyramid construction, but there's no hard evidence for exactly how they were built. No blueprints, no remains, just educated guesswork and a healthy dose of trial and error. Or, in your case, error and error. You step around a team of workers unspooling a rope to calculate ramp length. Their method involves measuring footsteps, which are neither consistent nor remotely accurate. One guy has a limp, and another keeps getting distracted by a beetle. It's less engineering, more interpretive dance. Still, the dedication is admirable. These aren't mindless laborers, they're proud craftsmen, hauling blocks from the quarries at Tura, floating them down the Nile on barges, and then dragging them up slopes of uncertain angle with tools barely stronger than your average kitchen knife. Somehow, they make it work. And then there's the scribe, always a scribe. This one's perched beneath a tarp with a palm fiber brush, muttering calculations under his breath and occasionally stabbing his tablet with more emotion than necessary. 4 degrees too steep. He growls, "We'll lose 5 workers a week to backslide. Minimum. Add more sand." Someone shouts. You don't know what that means, but everyone nods like it's genius. Nearby, someone builds a model ramp out of leftover bread loaves. It goes predictably wrong when the foreman eats part of it. A fringe theory you overhear suggests they used spiral ramps built inside the pyramid as it rose, basically a stone hamster wheel of doom. No evidence, of course, but it's got flair. And still the sun bakes down on this orchestra of discontent. The foremen keep drawing diagrams in the dirt. Workers keep dragging sleds that dig trenches into the ramp. One man, possibly dehydrated, starts arguing with a tree stump. You've been here for an hour, and absolutely nothing has been resolved. Welcome to the Giza Plateau. Welcome to the argument that never ends. And somehow, you're already sleepy. You wake up, or maybe you never really left, to the sound of shouting. Again, the sun is barely up, but the heat is already clinging to your tunic like an overly affectionate linen octopus. Someone's waving a reed pointer at a diagram carved into a dusty wall slab. It's another ramp plan. This one curls like a cinnamon bun around the pyramid. You sidle closer. This, the architect begins, is the spiral concept. Perfect for space, optimal for elevation, and incredibly stylish. You want us to drag 30-ton blocks in circles, a laborer says, holding a goat by the leash. As if daring the goat to object too, arguments blossom like lotus flowers in flood season. Historians still argue whether these spiral ramp theories are rooted in practicality or pure architectural fantasy. There are no ramp remains left behind, so ideas spiral just like the ramps themselves. External spirals, internal corkscrews, switchbacks clinging to pyramid faces like drunk snakes, every model plausible. Every theory conveniently unverifiable. You duck as two papyrus scrolls are flung across a table. Straight ramp. Direct. Predictable. Too long. Needs scaffolding. Eats up quarry space. Zigzag up the side. Then, steep but stable. Someone will fall. Again, they turn to you. You blink. A man shoves a piece of limestone into your hands and barks, "Okay." If you were a sled, would you prefer spiral or zigzag? You pretend to be a sled for a moment. It's oddly peaceful. The pharaoh, of course, is nowhere near this chaos. He's off in Memphis, reclining on a pile of imported myrrh and thinking about immortality. All he knows is that the pyramid must be bigger than the last one. And faster, too. No pressure. Rumor has it he once asked his vizier, "Can't they just build it straight up like a pillar?" That vizier has not been seen since. You follow a group of junior scribes to a shade canopy where the design proposals are being reviewed. It's less of a committee and more of a roast session. One scroll shows a ramp slingshotting stones via counterweight. Someone's drawn little birds for scale, and you hear, "Are those hawks? Are the hawks helping?" Those are aesthetic elements. The designer sniffs. It's visionary. "It's insane," replies someone eating figs aggressively. There's also a group debating whether ramps should be temporary or permanent. Build it, use it, dismantle it, or integrate it into the structure. One proposes filling the entire front with sand and carving the pyramid out of it after. You suspect he just wants an excuse to play in sand all day. As the ramp debates escalate, so do the metaphors. You don't understand. One architect groans. A ramp is like a river. It must flow, bend, and carry weight naturally. And yours floods every time it rains. Someone shoots back. Laughter ripples across the tent. A camel sneezes in agreement. Mainstream theory supports the straight-on causeway approach. But fringe thinkers today are gaining traction. Some point to wall reliefs that might show zigzag scaffolding. Others claim evidence lies buried under the sand right beneath where the food tents are set up. Meanwhile, nobody agrees what the incline should be. You hear 5, 10, 20 degrees tossed around like dice at a tavern. They argue in fractions and fists. One carpenter uses his own arm as a protractor, declaring, "See, 15 degrees. My arm has never lied." A general murmur of disapproval follows. Everyone remembers the bridge his arm calculated last month. You drift past a gang of rope braiders who are cheerfully ignoring the yelling. They joke that the real answer is no ramp at all. Just wait for the Nile to flood and float it up. One of them whispers a myth about ancient skyboats and levitating blocks. It's completely fictional, but for a moment, under the wide sky, it almost feels possible. You wander further. At the quarry edge, Two workers reenact a ramp angle test using watermelons. One ramps it at 10 degrees. The melon rolls beautifully. The other tries 25 and watches the melon launch into the foreman's tent like a fruity cannonball. Nobody gets fired. Somehow, but the foreman does claim divine punishment and takes the rest of the day off. Nearby, a group of bored teenagers has painted a giant ramp angle debate comic on the wall stick figures. Exaggerated falls. One poor guy permanently labeled Mr. Too Steep. Their teacher pretends to scold them but secretly adds a speech bubble when they aren't looking. As you circle back to the pyramid's base, you catch the scent of dried fish and heated ambitions. The main ramp, such as it is half complete and uneven. One side sags, another is mysteriously wider. Someone's added stairs, and nobody knows who did it. They call it ramp graffiti. And yet, the work continues. Blocks are moving, stone by stone. The pyramid rises inefficiently, stubbornly, beautifully. Arguments persist, tempers flare. But deep down, they all agree on one thing. This monument must outlast them. So they keep dragging, lifting, cursing, and revising. The angle might still be wrong, but the dream, it's going somewhere. You're up again, or maybe you never actually slept, and this time you're surrounded by people who are a little too enthusiastic about ropes. The sun is at its peak now, hammering down like an overseer with something to prove. You squint up at the ramp in progress. It stretches ahead like a stubborn tongue of stone and dust, snaking toward the pyramid's halfway point, where blocks already glisten in the heat like toasted marshmallows. At least 5 labor crews are arguing again. Today's topic: length. A longer ramp makes a gentler slope. One overseer insists, wiping sweat from his bald head. Gentle is good. It also means dragging blocks a mile. Someone else snaps. Gentle doesn't matter if your arms fall off halfway. Mainstream historians support the idea of long, straight ramps, some extending several kilometers, built from mud brick and limestone chippings. And you can see the logic. But logic doesn't carry blocks. Workers do, and these workers are having none of it. You trudge alongside a procession of sleds groaning under their burdens. Ropes creak, wood grinds against stone, and men grunt in rhythm as they haul 2-ton blocks toward the incline. Some whisper prayers, others curse the sun. One guy sings a love song to his donkey, who, shockingly, doesn't object. To ease the process, one of the crews is experimenting with wetting the sand in front of the sleds. You watch as water is poured along the ramp path. It darkens the dust, turning it sleek and sticky. And oddly enough, the sled glides smoother. Modern experiments confirm this. A dampened sand path can reduce friction by up to 50%. A neat trick, one that might have helped build a kingdom or at least save some vertebrae. Of course, not everyone's impressed. "You're wasting water," mutters a foreman. "That's for drinking, not dragging." Another counters, "Let them drink beer," which is actually accurate. Workers were often paid in bread and beer, up to 4 liters a day during peak hauling season. You watch one man sip lazily from a ceramic mug and declare, "This ramp would go faster if the blocks pulled themselves." No one disagrees. No one knows how to make that happen either. Meanwhile, another crew is experimenting with a pulley-like contraption. A frame of wooden rollers and a block harnessed with what looks like a spider web of ropes. A young apprentice waves a hand to demonstrate its revolutionary potential, then trips and nearly flattens the supervisor. You help pick him up. He nods politely, then immediately bans the device for excessive optimism. Farther up the ramp, things get steep. Too steep. The sleds slide backward. Workers tumble, and curses echo down the slope. One particularly unfortunate man ends up halfway buried in sand, his only visible limb giving a casual thumbs up. They call for reinforcements. You're handed a rope and somehow become part of the pulling team. Plant your feet, someone warns. Lean forward. Don't look at the sun. And if you hear snapping, run. You pull, your hands burn. Your shoulders scream. Every muscle in your body considers unionizing. But the block inches forward. Until it doesn't. There's a collective groan. The sled has jammed. A captain appears, chewing what might be a fig leaf, and declares the ramp too narrow at this segment. Workers grab shovels and begin widening it by hand, as if that's just a normal part of the process. You look around, dust swirls, heat ripples. A foreman scribbles something on a clay tablet and mutters, "This is fine." totally under control. It isn't, but that's the official statement. Suddenly, someone points to the eastern end of the plateau. Another ramp thinner, angled differently, has sprouted overnight. It's built from quarried stone, not mud brick, and its slope is aggressive enough to qualify as a dare. Nobody admits to building it, but it is there, and now it's an option. Historians still debate whether multiple ramps were used in phases, one straight on, others from the sides, or even the back. It's possible they shifted strategies mid-construction, depending on weather, politics, or sheer frustration. You hear one supervisor mutter, "Let them argue. I'm just here to finish a ramp before I die." Fair enough. You wander toward the tent quarters at the rear of the worksite. Inside, maps are being updated. Lines are erased and redrawn. One man's diagram now has 9 different ramp types crisscrossing the pyramid like a spiderweb. Red lines are theories, he says proudly. Blue lines are panic routes. You nod. It makes sense. Out by the Nile, a barge pulls in with more limestone. The blocks are offloaded with ropes and swearing. You catch a quiet moment as one worker gently taps a fresh block, like greeting an old friend. Straight to the top, he murmurs, one way or another, and you believe him. Because even if the ramp's too long, or too steep, or built at an angle that makes mathematicians cry, they'll keep dragging. Not because the plan is perfect, but because the work matters. You're jolted from your daydream, if it ever really was one, by the thud of a cart tipping over. A chorus of groans follows. And now you're standing ankle-deep in a pile of wet clay bricks. Someone forgot to reinforce the wheel rims again. The debate of the day? What should ramps actually be made of? Limestone ramp, a builder yells, holding up a dust-caked fragment like it's a relic from the gods. Too expensive. Someone shouts back, mud brick is fine if you know what you're doing. You mean if you like slipping off it every other Tuesday? The first one sneers, brushing flies from his face. You back slowly away from what's clearly about to become a full-on brick-throwing contest. Mainstream scholarship acknowledges that many ramps were likely made of mud brick, a sun-dried mixture of Nile silt, straw, and water. It's fast, cheap, and easy to shape. Also, extremely vulnerable to rain, wind, and the egos of engineers. One good seasonal downpour, and your carefully graded ramp becomes pudding. Limestone cladding makes it stable, insists one man, slapping a partial drawing onto a wall. Mud brick inside. Limestone skin, best of both worlds. Another throws down a clay tablet dramatically. You're trying to impress the pharaoh, not build a skywalk. The poor messenger standing nearby whispers, the pharaoh isn't even looking. He's promptly ignored. You sit near a quiet worker chiseling a block edge. She's listening to the argument but not participating. They'll keep shouting until the decision gets made for them, she says calmly, turning the chisel like she's tuning a harp. You watch as a team attempts to test both materials on the same incline. One half of the ramp is mud brick. The other, limestone. They send sleds up each side in an ancient version of drag racing. The limestone sled goes up clean, smooth, predictable. The mud brick sled wobbles, then swerves, then dumps its block sideways with a crunch that halts all conversation. Well, someone mutters, at least it made a statement. The tension thickens. A senior architect in a leopard print sash appears, declaring that aesthetics must be considered. Imagine the pharaoh approaching from the river and seeing that. He gestures wildly toward the cracked mud brick path. Imagine him falling off it. Someone replies, right onto your reputation. Cue silence, then snickering. You wander behind the stonecutter's tents, where someone's sketching alternative surfaces. Greased wood, he whispers, or oiled copper plating. Ultra slippery, ultra sophisticated. His friends nod, though one looks unconvinced. And what happens when the sleds go too fast? They'll adapt. They'll die. They'll adapt quickly. Fringe theories abound. One scribe speaks of using rolled logs beneath sleds. A clever idea except for one flaw. Egypt doesn't have a lot of trees. Imports from Lebanon were rare, expensive, and mostly reserved for fancy things like temple doors and royal furniture, not death ramps. Still, some modern fringe thinkers claim that levers, counterweights, and sandbags were used in combination to adjust elevation and momentum on the fly. The ancient version of anti-lock brakes, if you will. Here at the worksite, However, most people just rely on sandbags to stop runaway sleds. You wander up to a section of ramp freshly slicked with mud. A worker tests it by hopping on a flatboard, sliding a few feet before crashing into a bale of straw and declaring, "Nope." It's unclear whether that was a test or just boredom. Either way, it's helpful. Nearby, someone's trying a new bonding agent for bricks. It smells like fermented figs and failure. It'll harden faster, the man says confidently, nose wrinkling. Just needs sun and time. And prayer, a foreman mutters. You're describing mummification. Exactly. He beams. Historians still debate how exactly ramps held their form, especially as pyramid heights increased. Mud brick isn't known for structural grace under pressure. Some believe that constant repair and reshaping were simply part of the process. Build, break, patch, repeat. You see this truth in action when a segment of the ramp quietly caves in. Nobody panics. A crew just shows up with fresh bricks, more straw, and a goat for no clear reason. The goat supervises. The pyramid still looms above, quietly judging everyone. One worker stops to look up at it, sweat pouring down his back. "We're building the pharaoh's soul ladder," he says, almost reverent. He wants to climb into the sky. You follow his gaze. The sun blazes above. The ramp beneath your feet crumbles just a little more. Somehow, it still all moves forward. Because even when every material argues with gravity and the air tastes like sand and regret, they show up the next day to try again. And sometimes, the bricks hold. You're stirring again mentally, if not physically, as the smell of olive oil wafts through the morning air. Not from a kitchen, from the ramp. You blink. You sniff again. Yes, that's definitely oil. Today's experiment, greased sled tracks. You shuffle closer as two workers, one giddy, one extremely skeptical, pour olive oil along a groove carved into the ramp. The plan, less friction, smoother rides, happier backs, fewer crushed toes. Hopefully, they load a block onto a sled, line it up, and give it a push. The sled glides forward smoothly for about 10 feet. Then veers left, spins sideways, and slides gracefully off the ramp into a pile of sandbags. See, the giddy one says, less effort. The skeptical one sighs, you mean less control. You nod in silent agreement. The sandbag crew just nods back. This isn't their first rescue. Historians still debate whether lubricants like water, oil, or even animal fat were used to reduce friction on pyramid ramps. Some ancient wall reliefs show workers pouring water in front of sleds, but whether it was for dust suppression, traction, or drag reduction is still hotly contested. Either way, it's clear these folks will try anything. Another crew is back to using water bucket after bucket, sloshed methodically ahead of each block. It creates a slurry of wet sand that smells like ancient ambition and damp feet. The sled doesn't glide so much as squelch forward. Then someone suggests beer. He is promptly escorted off the ramp, not fired, just redirected to somewhere less flammable. You step over to a man sketching new designs into the dust with a reed stylus. "We could raise the sleds on rollers," he says. "Wooden tubes. Move them forward as the block rolls. Like legs, but smarter." You raise a brow. "Where are you getting all this wood?" He freezes. We'll discuss that later. Indeed, Egypt's limited timber supply has always made roller theories challenging. Cedar was imported, precious, and definitely not something you use to drag rocks, but fringe theorists, both ancient and modern, love the idea of clever, wheel-like hacks. Because, let's face it, anything to make this job easier. Meanwhile, a particularly bold crew has set up a tilted sled launch system. Essentially a ramp within a ramp, a sloped wooden surface greased with oil, aimed like a catapult at the main ramp. The theory, a strong enough shove will sling the block halfway up. You stand clear as they test it. The block surges forward, then immediately overshoots the ramp, crashing into a pile of amphorae filled with dried lentils. One explodes in a puff of legumes. Everyone cheers anyway. It wasn't effective, but it was fun. Down the hill, two older laborers grumble by a fire pit, stirring something in a clay pot. "What's that?" you ask. "New blend, sand, honey, and resin." One grunts, "Sticky, might grip better or attract scorpions." The other adds, "They pour a little on a test plank. It immediately hardens under the sun, cracking slightly." Back to oil. The first one says, you catch another scribe nearby jotting notes about beetle shell polish as a hypothetical lubricant. He insists it's a theoretical advantage in sheen-to-slide ratio. You don't argue. He looks like he bites. Historians still struggle to determine which ramp technologies were widespread versus experimental. The Egyptians didn't leave behind ramp instruction manuals, just results. Towering, precise, immovable results. And yet, behind those results, a century of bizarre tests, slippery failures, and oil-soaked planks. As you head toward the pyramid's base again, you notice something odd. There's a sled sitting motionless, untouched for hours. Next to it, a line of bricks carefully stacked, one by one, perfectly spaced. You glance around. No team, no tools, just a single inscription in the sand. The ramp works best when nobody is watching. You decide to leave it alone, possibly cursed. Elsewhere, the primary ramp has now been sectioned off into experimental lanes. One uses damp sand, another, stone rollers. A third has tiny notches carved into it, anti-slip ridges. You overhear a builder call it grip ramp, which sounds like something you'd find in a gym brochure. Even more curious, someone's created a system of rope and pulley return tracks not for blocks, but for hauling empty sleds back down. Saves time. He claims, keeps the crew from burning out. You help test it. The sled glides back downhill on a rope, bumps lightly against a catch post, and tips over instantly. We'll tighten the brakes, he mutters. Progress, it seems, is a matter of falls and fixes. As the day wanes, the sun softens to gold, and the heat loosens its grip. You find a seat on a chunk of leftover granite and look out across the plateau. Sleds still move. Crews still argue. One guy is now pouring water, oil, and beer in alternating lines purely for science. Nothing's perfect, but slowly, miraculously, everything's climbing. You blink awake, or you never really stop dreaming and the first thing you see is chaos. Organized chaos. Sure, but chaos nonetheless. Someone has built an entire new ramp section overnight, and no one seems to know who authorized it. You step carefully over scattered tools, crushed figs, and a single misplaced sandal to get a better look. This new ramp juts off from the eastern edge of the main causeway like a rogue branch. It's narrower, steeper, and suspiciously smooth. A scribe in a crumpled tunic mutters beside you. This wasn't on yesterday's diagram. Another shrugs. Maybe the gods approved it directly, or maybe Senhotep did it again. You don't know who Senhotep is yet, but 5 minutes later, you find him gesturing proudly at the base of his shiny new ramp. He's tall, sunburned, and looks like he hasn't slept since last flood season. No more debates, he says. This ramp is practical, minimal incline, compact footprint, and we built it while the rest of you were still arguing about olive oil. He's met with stunned silence. Then a low grumble rises like a desert wind. Too narrow. Someone says, "Where's the drainage?" Adds another. There's no ceremonial alignment. A third chimes in, clutching a chunk of obsidian like a protest sign. You step back before the mob forms. Historians still ponder whether multiple ramp styles were used simultaneously or even layered atop one another. Some believe builders created temporary ramps for staging or emergency access, then tore them down mid-project. This mystery ramp, it may be just such a case, innovative, sudden, and already controversial. You climb it, slowly. It's a tight fit. Even without carrying 2 tons of limestone, a test sled is being hauled as you walk. The incline isn't terrible, but there's something off. No guardrails, no friction control. Just polished stone and bravado. Halfway up, the sled jerks sideways. One worker panics and lets go of the rope. The block slides back 6 feet. Everyone screams, and it finally halts when it digs into a sandbag at the base. Again, Senhotep nods calmly. See? Still functional. You retreat carefully before the ramp eats someone. Back at the main site, other teams are in a frenzy. The new ramp has triggered what can only be described as a competitive architecture meltdown. 4 different crews are now sketching their own counter-ramp designs. One wants a ramp with steps built into it. Another wants a spiraling ramp that loops around the pyramid like a ribbon. One particularly artistic worker proposes a ramp shaped like a giant cobra for symbolic resonance. he says. Also, it scares off jackals or invites more. Someone counters. You walk past the storage tent, where someone's carved a ramp of the rising serpent into a support beam. It's unclear whether it's satire or the beginning of a cult. In the next tent over, a priest from Heliopolis is lecturing a team of workers about celestial alignments. If the ramp curves eastward by 6 degrees, we capture the rising sun's energy, spiritually and structurally. No one knows what that means, but the man has very nice sandals, so they nod. Historians still argue whether ramps were purely functional or carried symbolic significance. Some scholars believe alignment with stars, cardinal directions, or mythic animals was embedded in the very design. Others say, flatly, it was just easier to build that way. Your favorite explanation so far? The one that worked without collapsing. Later in the day, someone presents a scale model of an internal ramp hidden within the growing pyramid structure itself. The idea, as the pyramid rose, builders carved out corridors and dragged the stones upward through a spiraling path inside the body of the pyramid. Elegant, hidden, extremely hard to prove. One man scoffs, "If I can't see it, it's not real." Another leans in. Maybe the best ramps were always invisible. You feel like you're trapped in a philosophy class disguised as a construction site. Meanwhile, back at the mystery ramp, things aren't going well. A second test sled has overshot the corner, taken a wrong angle, and now sits lodged in a wall like a warning. Sanhotep, arms crossed, refuses to look concerned. Minor flaw, he says. Minor re-angling. Maybe 2 degrees, someone whispers, or 2 designers. Still, no one tears the ramp down. Yet, because despite its flaws, it's there. It exists. And when there are boulders to move, even a flawed ramp can be a miracle. The workers keep trying. They patch cracks, re-measure slopes, and argue over sandbag placement like generals planning a siege. One elderly stonemason, watching from the sidelines, leans over to you and murmurs, "This is always how it happens. Someone builds the wrong ramp for the right reasons, or the right ramp for the wrong ones." You nod. Because somehow, both feel true. As the sun drops toward the horizon, the pyramid looms taller. The latest blocks have been placed. The builders stand in its shadow, not quite celebrating, not quite defeated. And above them, the newest ramp crook, controversial and barely holding together, still points to the sky. The morning hits like a dropped block cloud, dusty and slightly off-center. You rub your eyes and squint at the pyramid again. It's taller, just slightly, maybe 1 layer more. But it's enough to make the whole argument about ramps even worse. You follow a group of workers gathering behind the central planning tent. A scribe whispers something to a foreman, who raises both brows so high they nearly exit his face. "They're saying there's no ramp at all," he mutters. You blink. "Excuse me." He gestures you closer. A handful of overseers are huddled around a scroll laid flat on a limestone slab. On it is the wildest idea yet. An internal spiral ramp, not just hidden within the pyramid walls, but embedded as it rises. You picture it. A tight corkscrew path ascending through the growing structure, narrow enough to move 1 block at a time. No external bulk. The scroll's author claims, "No wasted desert. Pure efficiency." One skeptical architect pokes the scroll with a stick. You realize that means they're carving tunnels inside a pyramid as they build it. And that's like cooking a loaf of bread while rearranging its crumbs from the inside. Historians still argue whether such internal spiral ramps were possible or simply speculative genius. A few modern scanning experiments at the Great Pyramid have hinted at internal anomalies, tunnels, or chambers that don't quite match expected voids. But whether they're part of a spiral ramp or just clever weight balancing remains an open debate. Meanwhile, the workers on the ground, they've begun whispering about phantom ramps, invisible paths the designers claim are there, but no one's allowed to walk on yet. Top secret. One says, only the senior architects know the layout. You suspect it's actually because they haven't finished designing it. At the base of the pyramid, you follow a team using rope and chalk to map out the theoretical entrance to the internal spiral. They measure, remeasure, then begin tapping on the limestone blocks. It's hollow here. Someone says, knocking with their knuckles. It's solid, says another. Maybe it's both. A third offers, very unhelpfully, to resolve it. They bring in a goose, Don't ask why, but apparently if the goose honks differently, it means there's space underneath. The goose does honk, but that's just what geese do. The mystery deepens. Not to be outdone, a rival group draws a full cross-section of the pyramid on papyrus, showing dual corkscrew ramps that meet at key junctions like a chariot roundabout. It's absurdly complex, and yet somehow elegant. A young boy delivering beer mugs peers at it and mutters, "That looks like intestines." Everyone nods slowly. It's not inaccurate. As you move between crews, you overhear another theory. Hidden levers embedded inside the blocks. You don't move the blocks, a scribe says dramatically. You make the pyramid pull them upward. He refuses to explain further, possibly because he doesn't know how. Fringe thinkers have always loved mysterious mechanisms in pyramid lore. Counterweights, electromagnetic pulses, even sound frequencies. Most of these ideas are best left in scrolls filed under extremely optimistic. But in this sandstorm of creativity, even the wildest theory gets one chance. One of the lead engineers, an older man with a bronze shoulder plate and the gait of someone who's fallen off too many ramps, looks at the chaos around him and sighs. "You want to know how we really move blocks?" he says, wiping sweat from his brow. "We scream at them until they give up." You laugh. He does not. But that's fair. Some days, it feels true. The internal ramp theory takes hold among younger workers. They start practicing tight, upward spirals around existing scaffolds, dragging blocks up miniature spiral paths like ants around a column. It's slow, awkward, and annoyingly kind of effective. Someone carves a tiny spiral ramp into a mud brick and names it Hope. In another corner, a few scribes are calculating how wide an internal ramp would need to be to allow a sled, rope team, and safety margins. The math works, barely. If you don't mind that nobody can turn corners without a prayer and a three-point turn, still, the idea grows. By dusk, teams have painted hypothetical spiral lines on the side of the pyramid. Just to visualize it, they wind upward like vines, zigzagging across shadowed surfaces and igniting new waves of whispered possibilities. You sit near the fire pit as someone tells a story about ramps that rise without edges, stone pathways blessed by the gods of geometry. You don't believe it. But when the wind shifts and the sand blows just right, the side of the pyramid does look like it's spiraling. Maybe it always has. It's night. Not the cool, refreshing kind, but the heavy, blanket-thick sort that clings to your skin and fills your mouth with the taste of limestone dust. You're crouched beside a campfire with a team of exhausted stonemasons, each of whom has an opinion on the tools, and none of them polite. "We need better copper," one mutters, holding up a twisted chisel that looks more like a soggy reed than a piece of metal. "You need better aim," another replies, jerking a thumb at a half-carved block nearby. "That groove zigzags like a drunken snake." You sigh, lie back on a mat, and stare at the stars while they bicker over metallurgy. Today's argument is less about ramps and more about what's going up them. Specifically, the tools carving, cutting, and shaping the blocks that must then be dragged skyward like oversized loaves of denial. Historians agree that Egyptian workers used copper tools, chisels, saws, adzes to shape limestone. But copper is soft. And as the pyramid rose, they ran into harder stone, like granite, hauled in from Aswan. And granite laughs at copper. You trail a team sharpening chisels on sandstone blocks. The rhythm is soft, almost meditative. Scrape, scrape, pause, curse, repeat. "We get a few cuts in," says one man. And then the chisel folds like wet papyrus. Someone nearby tosses a broken tip into a bucket already half full. "We go through 20 of these a week." You ask what happens when the tools run out. They just laugh and say, "We use fist." Probably joking. Probably. But things escalate when a newer team shows up with a batch of imported bronze chisels, an experimental alloy that some claim can handle denser stone. They're sleek, expensive-looking, and deeply resented by everyone who still uses tools that bend at the sight of a pebble. A murmuring starts. Why do they get bronze? Are they bribing the foreman? Maybe it's nepotism or magic. The bronze team, of course, wears smugness like sunblock. Later in the day, an unofficial test is arranged. 2 blocks, 2 teams, one with copper, one with bronze, 3 cuts each. You stand in the middle as the sun beats down like a referee with heat stroke. The bronze chisels glide cleanly through the limestone. The copper ones squeal, bend, and one outright snaps. You declare bronze the winner. The copper team demands a rematch, using softer stone. This wasn't regulation limestone. They claim a stonemason nearby calls out. Historians still argue whether copper was even used on granite, or if we faked it all with abrasives. You pause. He's not wrong. There's ongoing debate about how Egyptians shaped hard stone. Some scholars argue they used quartz sand abrasives, poured between a copper saw and the stone, grinding slowly through brute patience. You try it yourself. The sand is fine and sticky, and the motion is agonizingly slow, but it does cut. Eventually, sort of, maybe, back at the main ramp, tempers flare. One builder insists the real problem isn't the tools, it's the stone itself. This quarry batch is cursed, he says, patting a cracked block, full of bad omens, bad angles, or maybe it's just your chisel, someone replies. Another theory making the rounds. That tools aren't the issue at all. It's the angle of strike. One older worker walks around adjusting everyone's swing. Too flat, too sharp, too dramatic. This isn't theater, it's geometry. You appreciate the guidance until he takes your chisel and carves a perfect dovetail groove in 6 seconds. Then you feel inadequate. The tool maintenance tent is a hive of frustration. One smith is melting down broken copper bits to recast new chisels. He wipes his brow with an elbow and says, "We lose more copper than we keep. Can't we just ask the pharaoh for more?" He snorts. "Yeah, I'll send him a pigeon with a note that says more metal, fewer speeches." See how that goes? Despite all the complaints, they keep working, keep swinging, keep sweating. The tools may fail, but the hands don't stop. That, you realize, is the real technology here. People who refuse to quit. You pass a wall where someone's carved a tiny graffiti, a chisel with wings, flying triumphantly over a pyramid. Beneath it, one day, bronze for all. You smile. Someone else gets it. As the fire dims and the stars sharpen overhead, a group of apprentices sits in a circle sharing tool horror stories. One time, my chisel snapped and hit my supervisor in the foot. Once, I carved an entire block with the wrong angle. I sanded a block for 6 days. Turns out it was already level size. You drift off to their laughter, sharp, tired, and somehow comforting. The tools may be fragile, but the will behind them, absolutely not. You're awake before the sun. Or maybe you never slept, just shifted from one kind of exhaustion to another. Around you, the ramp stirs like a beast trying to roll over in its sleep. Crews begin to assemble, roped sleds creak into position, and a new voice is shouting geometry at the horizon. You spot him instantly, the angry mathematician. His name is Panefer, and he's holding a stick and a string like they're holy relics. He paces up and down a cleared patch of ground, surrounded by sandbags, carefully arranged into slope gradients. Too steep, we die, he mutters. Too shallow, we die from boredom. There is a sacred middle. His apprentices scramble around him, adjusting angles by mere finger widths. You approach one of them. "What's happening?" "Ramp calibration," the apprentice replies solemnly, as if that explains anything. You step around the sandbags. They're filled with Nile silt and tied with reeds, each acting as a movable elevation marker. Panefer uses them to simulate ramp scenarios with the right incline. He claims they can optimize haul routes, reduce crew fatigue, and even shorten build time by a full season. "We'll shave 6 weeks off," he promises, driving a stick into the ground. "The gods will thank us," someone nearby mutters. The gods haven't said a thing since flood season. Panefer waves a wax tablet at the sky like he's expecting thunderous approval. The math speaks. Historians still argue whether formalized geometry was used in Egyptian construction. The Rind mathematical papyrus contains early math problems, including slope calculations and volume estimates. But whether these were ever applied directly to ramp building is a mystery wrapped in sand and shouting. You watch as Panefer arranges 4 sandbags into a new formation, ties a rope between them, and uses a plumb line to measure drop-over distance. Then he frowns and kicks it over. "No, that's 17 degrees. That's chaos." You raise a brow. What's wrong with 17 degrees? You want to slide off a mountain while pulling a block the size of your house. Fair enough. Nearby, someone is dragging a weighted sled across a slope mock-up. The sandbags shift underfoot. The sled tips. A pile of amphorae explodes like clay fireworks. Pennefer gasps. Control the center of gravity. Control destiny. One apprentice sighs. He hasn't blinked in 3 days. You step over to the main ramp, where a separate group is arguing over a counterweight lever system. It involves long poles, large rocks, and more hope than structural understanding. The idea is simple. Pull down on one end, lift the sled up on the other. The reality is less elegant. One lever snaps, sending a block sideways into a trench. Someone yells. It was the wind. Historians do acknowledge the use of levers in ancient Egypt, especially for lifting and shifting large stones. It's likely they were part of the construction process, but not, as one worker here claims, the key to floating pyramids. Floating. Yes, that's a rumor now. A scribe named Meru is circulating scrolls that suggest the Egyptians discovered anti-weight channels. Grooves so mathematically perfect, stone became willing. He refuses to define what that means. You ask if that theory's testable. He just points at the sun and says, it's all around us. Right. You return to Pennefer's camp, where he's now arguing with himself. His apprentices are hiding under a tarp, pretending to nap. If you reduce incline by 2 degrees, you increase drag by 11%. He shouts at a rock. You want more drag, do you? The rock is indifferent. A worker walks by, munching on dried dates. I say we just roll the blocks uphill. Pennefer snaps toward him. That's not how gravity works. Gravity works for you. The man shrugs. We work against it. Later in the day, Pennefer attempts to simulate ideal friction zones using goose fat and rope. It ends badly. The test sled flies into a water barrel, which soaks the sandbags, which collapse the mock ramp, which sends one apprentice tumbling into a mound of leftover bricks. Pennefer sighs. Back to the chalkboard. You pass a group of elders nearby who've stopped even pretending to argue. Just build the ramp at whatever angle doesn't kill people. One says, make it work, adds another, picking mud from between his toes. That's the Egyptian way. You sit down with them. One shares a date. Another offers dried fig, and a third chuckles as Pennefer continues drawing new triangle equations in the sand. We didn't need math back in my day, he says. We just yelled until the blocks moved. You nod. Somehow, both methods are still in use. You don't so much wake up as you do roll sideways out of someone else's discarded linen tarp, brushing sand from your arms and squinting at the sun already halfway through its morning climb. Something's wrong. There's no yelling. You blink, turn left, turn right. No one's shouting about angles, ropes, or geometry. The ramp site is eerily quiet, and that's never a good sign. Then you see it. A section of the main ramp has collapsed, not fully just enough to trigger the kind of chaos that results in 20 different versions of whose fault it was, none of which agree. You trudge up the slope where the damage occurred. A quarter of the incline has caved inward, leaving a jagged pit where mud brick turned to soup and support beams splintered like stale breadsticks. At the edge, 3 foremen are already locked in a blame Olympics. It was too steep. One barks. No, it was the weight distribution. Yells another. Clearly, wind spirits from the west. Insists a third, pointing at absolutely nothing. You listen for a moment. The term divine punishment is floated. So is goose sabotage. You back away slowly. Historians still debate whether ramp collapses were common or catastrophic. There are no detailed records of ramp failures, but the sheer volume of construction and experimentation suggests trial and error was not just likely, it was inevitable. You hear Pennefer's voice next, muttering darkly from under a nearby palm mat. 17 degrees. I told them. Workers swarm the area with bricks, shovels, and a look that says again. In 50 different dialects, one simply sits on the ground, staring into the collapsed trench, eating an onion with slowness, angry bites. You join the damage crew, if only to stay out of finger-pointing range. The process is swift, if a little frantic. Clear the debris, repack the base, tamp the earth, reinforce with heavier stone. More sandbags. Someone shouts, no, fewer sandbags. Triangular bracing, not square. You hear all of this while holding a bucket, unsure who's right or what the bucket is for. A woman approaches holding a charred plank. You see this, she says, termites. That's what started the crack. You frown. Termites. She nods sagely. Always termites. A few yards away, one apprentice is suggesting a drainage system for the ramp. tiny clay pipes beneath the mud brick to prevent water buildup. He's met with blank stares. You want us to build a ramp for the ramp. He blinks. Yes, someone writes that down. Could be genius. Could be exile-worthy. As the sun climbs higher, the accident investigation takes a deeply ritualistic turn. A priest arrives from Memphis to inspect the site for spiritual imbalance. He scatters myrrh along the edge, murmurs something about Seth, the chaos god, and walks in a circle 3 times. Balance is restored, he declares, before tripping on a stone and disappearing into a sand dune. You keep working. Eventually, the ramp stabilizes kind of. The broken section is patched, reinforced, and then decorated with 3 painted eyes to ward off evil spirits. One of them winks. By midday, a new sign goes up. Do not use until blessed again. Nobody reads it. Everyone uses it anyway. Back at the planning tent, the accident is being redrawn on a papyrus scroll labeled Recent Ramp Failures. The list includes overconfidence again, untested material swap, ramp side camel traffic, Panifer's triangle math, weather blamed but not confirmed. Nearby, a group of scribes is drafting a ramp inspection checklist. Item 1. Touch every brick. Item 2. Ask if the ramp feels ready. Item 3. Sacrifice a chicken, just to be safe. You overhear one particularly animated scribe suggesting the use of stone ballast to stabilize the ramp edges. Just line it with granite blocks. It'll anchor the incline. Someone else mutters. Then we'll need a ramp to build the ramp to line the ramp. They pause. We'll think about it. You step aside as a cart full of new mud brick rumbles by, its driver yelling at goats to move. The goats do not care. They never do. Later, someone suggests painting warning signs on the ramp itself. Red pigment to indicate steep patches, yellow for soft edges. A painter begins experimenting immediately. His first attempt spells this part bad. Direct, if not poetic, as the sun begins to lower, casting long shadows across the newly repaired slope. One worker sits down beside you and sighs. You know, he says, some days I dream of the pyramid that builds itself. No ramps, no rope burns, no blame. You nod, but then, he continues, we'd have nothing to yell about. You both laugh, dust-covered and sun-scorched, sitting at the edge of a ramp that might still be wrong but is, at least, standing. And tomorrow, they'll try again. You wake up to stone silence, not the peaceful kind, but the suspicious kind. A kind of silence that usually means something ridiculous is happening nearby. And it is. A small crowd is gathered at the eastern edge of the worksite. Everyone is staring at the Sphinx, who as usual is saying nothing. But today, it's personal. You inch closer. At the center of the circle stands a designer named Beckham. He's pacing in front of the massive limestone face, arms flailing dramatically. I'm just saying. He insists, we've tried math, we've tried mud, we've tried 24 ramp angles. Maybe it's time we asked for divine consultation. You glance around. A few nod seriously. One offers incense. Another has brought a small goat. Someone mutters, the Sphinx is a silent partner in all of this. Someone else mutters, the Sphinx is just tired of being blamed. Historians still speculate about the symbolic and spiritual significance of the Sphinx during pyramid construction. While the Great Sphinx of Giza likely predates the Great Pyramid, many believe it acted as a spiritual guardian of the site, or at least as a very expensive bystander. Beckham bows low. O wise guardian of sacred angles, he begins. What incline would please your eternal gaze? A breeze stirs. The Sphinx says nothing. Exactly, says a skeptic nearby. That's a yes to 20 degrees, or a no to all of this. Someone else offers. You back away slowly, as the debate mutates into a full-blown ramp design seance. Over lunch, someone casually suggests reading omens in brick patterns. If the mud cracks into a spiral, that's a sign we should go with corkscrew ramps, or that we're dehydrated. You bite into a lukewarm barley cake and listen as the topic shifts from engineering to divine symbolism. Some claim every block dragged upward is a metaphor for the soul's journey. Others claim the blocks are just blocks. Still, it becomes a trend. Suddenly, everything is symbolic. One group insists that the incline must match the sun's seasonal path to honor Ra, they say. Another claims that ramps facing west invite death. That's the land of the setting sun, bad for morale. Bad for sled traction. A foreman adds, quietly, you wander back to the main ramp. There, a group of painters is sketching a mural on the side, a stylized scene of a chisel being guided by a falcon-headed god toward a perfectly angled ramp. Underneath, truth is found in slope. You try not to laugh. Someone sees you and says, it's art. Let them feel something. You pass a crew leader drawing a circle in the sand. All construction is circular, he explains. We ascend, then descend, then repeat until enlightenment or collapse. So, the ramp is a spiritual metaphor. No, the ramp is a circle. We're just on the flat part. You thank him for absolutely nothing and move on. Back at the Sphinx, Beckham is still at it. If you support spiral ramps, he says, do nothing. The Sphinx obliges. Spectacularly, a young apprentice sneaks a tiny offering of flat triangular brick onto the Sphinx's paw. She's with us now, he whispers. Historians, of course, would later uncover no evidence of the Sphinx being used for anything other than architectural awe and shade. But that doesn't stop the rumors, or the prayers, or the dozen different ramp designs now labeled Sphinx approved. One of them includes a loop. Nobody understands what it's for, not even the designer. It just felt right. You walk past the storage tent and find someone carving mini pyramids into soapstone blocks. Their offerings, he says, to the spirit of slope. You blink. That's not a thing. It is now. Back on the ramp. Work still continues, slowly, almost reverently. One worker blesses the rope before tying it. Another sprinkles sand in a spiral pattern before each haul. Even the donkey looks thoughtful. And then, without warning, someone actually asks the Sphinx a non-ramp-related question. What's the meaning of life? The wind picks up. The Sphinx says nothing. But somehow, it feels like enough. You sit beside a fire as the day ends, watching shadows stretch over the stones. The workers begin to drift back to their camps. The ramp is still uneven, the incline still uncertain, but the team's faith weirdly intact. Maybe it's the silence of the Sphinx, or maybe, after enough failed ramps and broken bricks, people just need something bigger to lean on than limestone and geometry. Even if it never blinks, it's morning again, and by now, your internal clock has given up entirely. You don't know what day it is. The only reliable unit of time is how many blocks made it up the ramp. Today's count, not great. You wander past the usual shouting match over slope degrees. We're back to arguing about 12 versus 13. 5. Again, only to find something new glinting in the sun. A rival crew has decided to build an obelisk. You stop, stare, blink. It's not small, it's not subtle, and it's definitely not part of the pyramid plan. What is this? You ask the lead architect, who's wearing gold-threaded sandals and the expression of someone about to explain a crime, a demonstration. He replies with a grin. We want to prove our ramp design works, so we're building something taller, faster, and more beautiful. You pause. Out of spite, out of science. You're not convinced. The ramp they've built is narrower, wrapped in tight coils like a snake about to strike. It hugs the obelisk base tightly, spiraling upward with just enough width for a single sled. They've called it the rising path. You call it an invitation to injury. A scribe nearby notes that if the obelisk is completed before the next pyramid layer, the crew will win some sort of bragging rights. Also, they bet 5 goats on it. You nod slowly. Of course they did. Historians know that obelisks were massive feats of engineering, often weighing hundreds of tons. Most were carved from a single block of red granite and somehow transported and raised without cranes, forklifts, or divine levitation. How? Still unclear, but this crew thinks they've figured it out. You watch as workers pour water down the spiral ramp, then smear it with beeswax. A sled with a smaller stone test block begins its ascent. The rope team pulls. The sled glides. It works for about 6 seconds. Then it slips sideways, hits the inner wall, and tumbles off in slow motion. No one is hurt except for one apprentice's feelings. Still, the crowd gasps. It was almost majestic, not discouraged. The crew immediately declares the test a qualified success. You hear someone shout, "It was the wax. Next time, honey only." Back at the pyramid ramp, everyone's watching. The sudden obelisk project has thrown the original pyramid builders into an unexpected existential crisis. Why didn't we build something dramatic? We could have added a statue, We don't need flair. We need function. Function doesn't get goats. The pyramid foreman, a man who hasn't smiled since flood season, calls a team meeting. Let them have their fancy spiral. He growls. We're building something that lasts forever. The crew nods solemnly. Then someone mutters, but maybe we could carve a falcon into the next layer. Elsewhere, workers are discussing the prestige slope, a theoretical angle so elegant, so balanced, that any project using it will be naturally beautiful. They argue whether it's 14 or 17 degrees. Why not just ask the obelisk team what they used? You ask, they lied. Someone whispers, they always lie. You wander back toward the Sphinx. Someone has dressed it in a linen sash labeled Official Ramp Judge. Nobody removes it. At midday, the obelisk project hauls its first real block halfway up the spiral. It's slow, delicate work. One slip and the whole sled will fall, taking the rope team with it. You hold your breath. The ramp groans. The block moves, one step at a time. You glance up at the pyramid. It's taller, not by much, but enough to remind you that while everyone else was being dramatic, the core team was still building. And that's the quiet truth of pyramid projects. The most important ramps aren't flashy. They don't spiral. They don't shimmer. They just work. Still, as the obelisk block reaches its pedestal, a cheer erupts. The Sphinx remains silent, but one bird lands on its head and poops dramatically. An omen. Someone whispers, good or bad, depends on who you ask. By evening, the obelisk crew is exhausted, but smug. The pyramid crew is behind schedule, but united, and you sit between the two, watching a falcon glide low over both projects, wings wide in the golden dusk. Maybe there's room for both paths. Flare and function, obelisks and pyramids, spirals and straight shots, all climbing toward the same sky. It's hot, hotter than usual. The kind of heat that peels paint from pottery and melts even the strongest opinions into puddles of fatigue. You trudge past the supply tent, where a worker fans himself with a scroll labeled Revised Ramp Budget, version 9. Spoiler alert, there is no version 10. Today's debate, not slope, not tools, not divine omens. It's heat, specifically how to build ramps and drag stone in a furnace. You follow the crew to the main incline, which now looks like it's sagging under the glare. The mud brick is drying too fast. The ropes are brittle. One foreman swears that the air itself is cracking. Even the dust is sweating. A man mutters, flicking grains from his neck. The supervisor calls for a break, but the foreman above ignores him. We're behind, he grunts. The sun's not our enemy. Laziness is. Within 20 minutes, a sled overturns. The block rolls. No one's hurt. But someone yells, we told you the tarps were melting. You glance up and spot the problem. Sections of the ramp are covered with linen tarps tied between poles to create shade. In theory, brilliant. In practice, they've begun to sag like cooked noodles, threatening to collapse entirely. Someone tries tightening the ropes. They snap with a twang like an angry harp. Nearby, a younger worker suggests shifting work to nighttime. You know, he offers. When the sky isn't trying to kill us, a chorus of groans rises from the old-timers. We can't see. We can't sleep. The ghosts are louder at night. That last one is not elaborated on. Historians believe pyramid construction likely occurred seasonally, avoiding the worst heat. But even during cooler months, the Egyptian sun doesn't exactly whisper. Teams had to adapt, and some clearly didn't. The team tries misting the ramp with water to cool it. It helps for about 15 minutes. Then the mud turns to paste, and a hauler slips face first into a damp brick. Someone suggests wool-wrapped ropes to prevent sun-brittle snapping. You ask if that's efficient. No, he says, but it feels smarter. Someone else begins laying wet palm fronds across the ramp. The plan: reduce friction and radiant heat. The result: one sled glides too fast, crashes through a bucket station, and wipes out a tray of onions. A worker screams. Not the lunch. Back at camp, you find a group experimenting with cooling salves made of myrrh, date syrup, and crushed mint. They smear it across their shoulders and say it's like being hugged by a breeze. You try it. It's not. You overhear a scribe wondering aloud, if we built the ramp under the pyramid, it'd be shaded, right? Or buried, someone replies. Meanwhile, the brick team starts adjusting mixtures, adding more straw and beer dregs to hold moisture. Surprisingly, it works. The bricks dry slower, resist cracking, and smell vaguely festive. Historians still discuss how ancient workers adjusted their materials based on seasonal changes. Brick recipes, water hauling systems, and work schedules may have shifted constantly. Flexibility wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity. One particularly desperate worker builds a mini-ramp out of solid stone blocks sunproof. He boasts, but impossible to reconfigure. His partner replies, like your marriage. You leave before that conversation escalates. By afternoon, even the Sphinx looks annoyed. Someone's given it a hat made from soaked linen. It drips slowly. A passing falcon lands beside it, then flies away immediately. Too hot even for symbolism. You watch the ramp crews start wrapping the sled bases in charcoal-soaked fabric, claiming it absorbs the heat before it hits the stone. You ask how that works. We don't know. One shrugs. But the foreman believes in it, and that's half the battle. At day's end, another meeting forms. This time, nobody yells. They just sit in the shade, sipping barley beer, scratching diagrams in the sand. Some suggest rotating teams cool-down crews and hauling crews. Others want to raise a canvas canopy over the entire ramp. But that plan dies when they realize it would cost more fabric than exists in all of Memphis. Eventually, they settle on a patchwork system, shorter work shifts, mud cooling stations, brick recipe adjustments, and shockingly listening to the apprentices for once. Someone carves a small message into the ramp base. Everything melts, except deadlines. You sit beside it and nod. And just before the sun disappears behind the pyramid, a final sled makes it to the top, its haulers sunburned, staggering, and singing a victory song that mostly consists of the word sleep. The ramp survived. So did you. Barely. It begins with a trumpet. Not an actual trumpet, more like a conch shell with aspirations. Either way, the sound that blares through the worksite pierces the air like a goat in distress, which would be fine. Except it means only one thing. The pharaoh is coming. Panic follows instantly. You watch an entire crew sprint to reposition a sled just so it looks like it's in motion. Someone tosses fresh straw over a cracked ramp section. Another starts yelling, "Work faster," at a brick pile, which cannot hear and does not care. You are handed a broom and told to sweep the dirt off the dirt. The sound grows louder. A dust plume rises at the southern edge of the site. Then, like a mirage turning real, the pharaoh's procession appears, shimmering in gold, fanned by attendants, followed by oxen, scribes, guards, musicians, a small man with a pet falcon, and one lady carrying what appears to be a perfectly roasted duck. Historians often debate whether pharaohs made frequent inspections of major building projects. The evidence is mixed, but based on the number of people currently pretending not to be panicking, you'd guess this pharaoh shows up just often enough to make everyone sweat. He steps down from a chariot draped in blue linen and surveys the site. He says nothing. A high official steps forward. "Your Majesty, behold the great pyramid rising under your divine rule." The pharaoh squints, nods, then, to everyone's horror, he gestures toward the ramp. You watch as the supervisor nearly faints. A scribe drops a stylus. Someone whispers, "He's going to walk it." And he does. Well, not alone. He ascends with 2 guards, a scribe, and an older man holding what looks like an emergency chair. You fall in line behind them, curious and mildly terrified. The ramp's incline is just steep enough to make everyone awkward. The pharaoh, to his credit, climbs with minimal complaint, though he stops every 10 steps to point at things and ask questions. What is that dark spot? Mud reinforcement. Oh, radiant one. Why is that rope frayed? It adds texture. Is that man sleeping? No, he's meditating on gravity. You reach the halfway point. The ramp creaks slightly. Everyone freezes. Should we turn back? Someone dares to ask. The pharaoh waves them off and keeps climbing. You notice workers up ahead frantically fixing things as he approaches. Wetting bricks, tightening lines, replacing wooden beams with ones that are less wooden. It's theater, but effective. At the top, He pauses. The pyramid stretches below. The Nile glints in the distance, and the ramp cuts through the site like a giant scar or a spine. The pharaoh finally speaks. It's uneven. Silence. Then a flurry of replies. We've recalculated the angle. We've adjusted the materials. We're blaming wind again. He raises a hand. Everyone quiets. It looks strong, he says, but not elegant. You could hear a papyrus tear in that silence. Back at the camp, a secondary scribe is rewriting the inspection notes so they read. The ramp possesses foundational vigor. The pharaoh smiles upon its potential. You watch as the pharaoh descends, this time via a smoother side path hastily constructed from clean stone blocks. They call it the royal slope. It was built this morning. It will be dismantled by sunset. Historians still debate whether building modifications were made solely to appease pharaohs during inspections. Given today's performance, the answer is clearly yes, absolutely, and probably twice a week. As the royal entourage departs, one overzealous assistant offers the pharaoh a scroll of alternative ramp concepts. Helix spirals, double switchbacks, and one option shaped like a cobra's tongue. The pharaoh looks at it. Build what works, he says, then he's gone. You sit down beside the main ramp, heart still racing. A man collapses next to you. I forgot to breathe for the last hour. Another worker nearby says, he didn't hate it. That's basically praise. Someone else begins carving not elegant but strong into a stone chip. You suspect it will become a slogan. Later that evening, under the soft rise of stars, the crews relax for the first time all day. The emergency chair guy has passed out, holding the chair. A donkey wanders by with a garland of papyrus tied around its neck. No one knows why. You stare at the ramp it held, and in some small, dusty way it earned a nod from a god king. Not bad for a day's panics. You wake to the soft sound of bricks being moved carefully, quietly, as if someone is afraid the pyramid might hear them. The air is cooler today. The sky is the pale color of baked clay before it cracks. You stretch, roll your shoulder, and sit beside the base of the ramp, watching the sun crawl over its edges. There's no yelling this morning. No one arguing about angles, degrees, or ramp philosophy. Just work. The blocks move slowly. The sleds groan as they inch up the slope. Ropes tightening, crews breathing in practiced rhythm. They've done this so many times now, it no longer needs explanation. There's something sacred in the repetition. Lift, pull, set, step, repeat. Someone walks past you carrying a bucket of water and nods. Not in greeting, just recognition. You're part of this now. You've been there for collapses, disputes, phantom ramp theories, and sweaty sunmelt days. You've seen secret ramps built overnight and a pharaoh descend in a cloud of linen and judgment. You've watched dreams spill over edges and still get reformed, reshaped, and tried again. You look up. The pyramid is nearly done. Just a few more layers, just a little more sky to climb. At the top, a new platform has been prepared not for another block, but for a ceremonial brick, a piece of gleaming white Tura limestone, polished to mirror the sun. It's a final piece, not the biggest, not the heaviest, but symbolic. The last of the last. You follow the crowd as it's carried upward, slowly, reverently. The ramp teams move with unusual grace like they've memorized every grain of this slope, every echo of every footstep. The crowd falls into silence as the stone is placed, not slammed, not dropped, just set perfectly. And with that, it's over. The ramp crews sit down, wipe their brows, and look around as if seeing the site for the first time, not as a battlefield of theories or a canvas for squabbles, but as something complete. Someone laughs, but it's quiet. Someone else says, "We should build another one." A few groans, some nods. One voice says, "Let's rest first." You wander toward the base of the ramp one last time. Someone's scratched a message into a flat stone there. This angle was never perfect, but it got us here. And it did. You sit for a while longer, watching workers dismantle the outer edges, some ramps to be repurposed, others to be buried under time. They'll fade into the sand until future historians squint at satellite scans and argue whether they ever existed. But you were there. You walk once more along the worn grooves of the ramp, now like an old road soft with memory, smooth with use. Ropes dangle loose, sandbags lie half empty. The sun glints off copper tools left like relics. And for once, Nobody's asking why it worked. Because it did. And that's enough. So now, as we step away from the dust and the sun-scorched stone, you feel the heat lift from your shoulders. The noise softens. The slope flattens. You're no longer climbing, no longer pulling, just floating gently back into quiet. Imagine the Giza Plateau fading into the twilight. The pyramid glows faintly in the last light, its edges softened by distance and time. The workers are gone now, the tools put away, and all that remains is stillness. Maybe somewhere, a breeze moves across the Nile. Maybe the Sphinx is finally resting her eyes. And you're lying back beneath the stars, breathing in air that no longer tastes like stone. No more debates, no more designs. No more failed test ramps launched like stone sleds into piles of onions. Just the memory of 1,000 hands working in rhythm, and the whisper of a ramp that, for all its flaws, got them to the top. You let that feeling hold you warm, steady, unhurried. The climb is done, and there is nothing left to prove. Just sleep now. Sleep like sandstone under moonlight. Sleep like a chisel after the last cut. Sleep like a pharaoh, watching his pyramid rise in dreams. Good night.